Hello and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,000 comedians over the last 47 years. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today. It's the brilliant Mr. Nick Kirk. Yes! Hello, mate. How are you?
Hello, Rich. Thank you for having me.
Are you all right?
I'm good, and thank you for the lovely traditional Richard Gill style welcome.
It's my pleasure, and what a guest. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, delighted.
Good man. Well, we're going to talk about your comedy career for the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. So I'd like to kick off by asking you first off, how did you become a comedian in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, that's a slightly unusual one, probably compared to most comedians, given the way it sort of started in a very winding kind of way. I think the short version is there was a pandemic, but I'll give you a longer version because that's just too short, really. I mean, I've always loved comedy, yeah. But and there's always probably been a little thing in the back of my mind saying, oh, I'd love to try stand-up, but I think there was a bigger voice saying, but you're not funny enough. So I'd kind of always let the bigger voice rule and never really thought about giving it a try.
Wow.
Obviously, come 2020, the COVID pandemic hit and we were all locked down. And I started watching a lot of online comedy, largely through Next Up to start with, because they were kind of one of the first ones to start trialing a lot of it. And through watching their comedy festival they did in the sort of summer of 2020, there was one show that just stood out for me, and that was Stuart Goldsmith's Infinite Sofa.
Brilliant.
So for anyone that hasn't seen it, it was basically an online interactive chat show that he did during lockdown, which had a number of comedy guests on that he would interview, but he would also have 12 people as the sort of Zoom audience who would interact with him and the guests. And I sort of saw this as part of the Next Up, and the following day started following, put in and got on the audience and was on the show the kind of following Monday. And gradually over the months, I started doing that more and more. And I began to enjoy starting to interact a bit with Stu and the other people.
So this was just as an audience member?
Yeah, so
wow.
Just a sort of regular audience member. But what Stu was doing as part of it was every Monday morning before the show, he would have all of this was on Twitch. He was streaming all of this. So on Twitch on a Monday morning, he would have a sort of virtual writer's room where people could pitch in ideas for the show and things that he would use and little silly games to do with the chat and things like that. And I started to pitch stuff in there, and some of it started to get used. And I was thinking, oh, actually, this is quite fun. I'm actually not just an audience member. I'm now contributing to a comedy show. Off the back of that, I decided to do an online improv class so that I'd be better at interacting when I was on the show. So at this point, I still wasn't thinking about doing stand-up. I was just thinking, I like doing this show. I want to be a better audience member of this show. I should try doing a bit of a comedy course to be a better interactor and part of the show.
This is ambitious.
Yeah, so it's, but all of this I would never have done if we weren't locked down in our homes and you didn't have access to these kind of new online ways of entertainment. So I did that for a little while, and right towards the end of 2020, one of my kind of the fellow audience members and a friend of mine, Leslie Gold, who you've spoken to as well previously, she'd contacted a number of the audience members for the show and said, well, I'm a stand-up. I've already been doing stand-up before the pandemic. If I put on an online show, would people be interested in trying some stand-up? Because basically it was a group of comedy nerds, but most of them were aspiring in their heads, aspiring stand-ups as well, really, even if we didn't realize it. And she messaged me to say, oh, I think you should put in for this show. I think you'd be good at stand-up. My first response was, oh, really? I don't think I could write something funny. But she pushed and said, no, I think you should go for it. And I said, okay, I'll give it a try. wrote a routine
man.
about my the weird things my nephews say, and did that on the 27th of December 2020, and have been doing stand-up ever since. So
Wow.
I'm relatively new to all of this.
Well done, though. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And this is we're going to talk about the comedy club So Funny later, but there's more. There's obviously a lot more to it to that. You do presumably you do 5-minute sets. Is that how you get into it in different clubs with friends?
Yeah, so to start with, it's 5 minutes is how you start proving your time, and obviously because I started in December 2020, that first 4 or 5 months I was doing stand up, it was all online only, Zoom only gigs like this setup here.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate in that the So Funny ones and a couple of the others, ones like G&B Comedy, had sort of audiences who would respond. So that I was quite lucky in that quite a few of the Zoom gigs I did get a response. So it kind of prompted me to keep going. But yeah, you start off with 5s, and then once you've proved yourself to promoters, they'll start to offer you a little bit longer spot. Yeah. They'll invite you back for 10s if they've got them. So I've been starting to do a lot more 10 spots recently.
Good man.
And recently one promoter offered me a sort of 15 to 20 minute spot
Good lad.
last month, which was really nice. So,
brilliant.
Because like I said, I've only been going for about 14, 15 months, so it's quite unusual to get offered a longer spot like that.
Good man. That's fantastic. Very ambitious again, because it's I say to a lot of the comedians, presumably it's all about experience. The more you do, the more you can build it up and etc. And certainly one of the main things about my blog is that I support up and coming new comic talent as well as the traditional comedians. And many comedians have gone by where I have been their best friend in the audience. I've been the friend who they've gone along with and laughed in all the right places.
I can certainly attest to that one.
But I love to do it because if they've got a talent, you can clearly see, and it's wonderful. Another reason why the blog exists is watching comedians grow. So only recently I was talking to Harry Hill, and he still holds the record for the best opening line I've ever heard, which would have been about 30 years ago, where I watched him downstairs at the King's Head. And he was late for the show. He brushed past me, climbed up onto the stage, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry I'm late. I had to have a testicle brought down." And there was a pause, and he said, "From Derby." And it was the best opening line I've ever heard. And when I challenged him on this, he said, "I still use it to this day."
Yeah. I mean, I love Harry Hill. I'm a huge fan
amazing.
Of that kind of thing.
I mean, anyway, enough of that. Where was your first ever gig and what was it like? So you're there busy doing your online audience participation at Stuart Lee's online show.
Stuart Goldsmith.
Sorry, Stuart Lee. Stuart Goldsmith, I beg your pardon, yeah. Where was your first ever live gig?
Yeah, so my first ever live gig would have been about May of 2021. So just not even a year ago now. I'm thinking about it. Yeah, and that was at Fulham Comedy Club in that one. Wow. And that was as quite often happens with a lot of the open mic gigs, that was a bringer gig. So I needed to bring someone with me in order to perform. It's quite a sort of standard practice in the open mic world, and as with everything in comedy, there's like two camps. There are people who think the bringers are great and it's a good way to get an audience along to a gig who wouldn't normally come to an open mic gig, and there are those who think, well, actually, promoters should be promoting a gig to get an audience in rather than relying on the acts to bring an audience in. So there's always two streams of thought on that. I think for me, like, I'm happy to do bringer gigs. The only thing is, it's just additional admin because you've got to find people to go.
Well, now you know me. If you need somebody there, I'm there.
Good to know. Yeah, Mr. Audience, of course.
You're very kind. And
so it was, and I think what really helped, given that it was kind of my first gig in a way, because I'd done gigs online. What the online gigs helped me with was, one, remembering material.
Yeah.
So having that all down and in my head, and two, not panicking if people didn't respond to a joke, because a lot of the online gigs you don't necessarily get much of a response, so you just keep going, because you just have to hope that people are enjoying it somewhere in the background if they're not necessarily responding.
Yeah.
So it meant that I wasn't going to be phased if people didn't respond. The difficult things, I think, the first time I did a live gig were things like, where do I hold the microphone and how do I stand? Because I've just been doing gigs in kind of this space here. So I was quite static. I don't think I moved very much because I wasn't used to moving around.
That's really interesting. So interesting. Other than the blog, the most creative thing I ever did was write a play, which is a half an hour, and it's called The Applicant. And it's me and my mate did it for Comic Relief, but I wrote it for the Edinburgh Fringe, and we put this on in 2007. And the play is all about, it's basically me coming down from Carlisle, got a successful girlfriend with a job in London, and I've never been interviewed before, and so it goes waiting room interview, and it builds up. And in the waiting room, he's never had an interview, so he's looking around nervous, and he's starts chatting to the audience. Now, so I wrote all these great monologues, and on the first night we did it, I ran out and I forgot the monologue, and I was like a rabbit in headlights, and I'd written the bloody thing. And my question is, when you say about remembering lines, how do you go about doing that? Do you with this very early experience being online, getting to learn them, has it become easier to learn them as you go along?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everyone has different processes for how they do material. You know, a lot of people will just have, you know, some bullet points and keywords that they want to hit, and they might not necessarily be fully specific about a lot of the wording around what they're doing. They'll have some set phrases, obviously, and key funny words and lines they want to use, but they'll probably be a bit more open to letting themselves kind of move around.
Yeah.
I'm very scripted in what I do. I have to write it out in full, and I'm very much a kind of notebooks kind of person. So I'll draft it out in full, and as I go through and redraft it a few times, what I find is I draft it out in full and there'll be a lot in it. And as I redraft it, I'll narrow it down to the funny core, trying to cut out all the unnecessary words and phrases. Because as you can probably, I'm talking a lot, so you can tell I tend to overwrite, overuse words. Good. So it's all about, in that initial drafting, trying to cut it down to the real nuggets of the funny stuff. And then as I'm rewriting it, that kind of helps me to memorize it in one respect, you know, and I kind of have then a separate notebook that I sort of transcribe into once it's the routine I'm going to do on stage. And then before the first time I do it, I will do it out loud in my room about, you know, however many times I need to cement it in my head. It still doesn't stop you having those occasional times where you go up and you forget what the words are, you know, but it's just the way the brain works sometimes.
And following on from that, what do you like to talk about on stage? Do you have any specific themes at all?
I think a lot of my stuff tends to be, I was thinking, one of the questions we get asked a lot, obviously, is to describe ourselves. Like promoters particularly like us to have a bio and to encapsulate, you know, what sort of comedy you are, obviously, because if they're putting a mixed bill together, they want to try and work out who they're putting together, what types they've got. I always find it very hard to try and pigeonhole it. I mean, I'd say it's kind of storytelling. Recently, I was kind of thinking the phase is probably more thought experiments, because I'll pick a subject and let my mind wander on it, and then the routine will be the wanderings of my mind on that particular thing. I think it's probably fair to say there are things I'm avoiding talking about at the moment. I'm trying not to really talk about friends or family, because I feel like that's a little unfair to them to talk about them. And, unless I speak to them beforehand and say, I'm going to talk about this, do you mind? I do a routine where I mention my parents, but the routine is I can't get any material off them because I had a nice upbringing. So it's not like I'm not saying anything
it's
nasty
nothing
about
bad.
them. So I don't tend to do stuff that's personal in that respect, but I would do stuff that's personal in that it's about me and the way my mind works and the sort of things I think. So I think, and I've got some routines that also play around with the structure of comedy. And I know that's, from speaking to a lot of comedians, that's stuff that new comedians tend to do a lot, because you're like, oh, I've learnt these rules, so now I can show you how to break them. Oh, look at me, aren't I clever? I just quite like meta type of jokes as well, jokes about jokes.
Brilliant. Brilliant. I love jokers. I love comedians who actually tell jokes, one-liners. One-line merchants are just incredible.
I mean, I love them, but I can't do it. I mean, I've tried it. I did quite a few online courses, some about writing, some about writing and performance. And one of them done by a comedian called Grania Maguire. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, know her well, yeah.
Yeah, she does an excellent course on writing.
Yeah.
And it gives you lots of exercises and tools to try. And she goes through lots of different types of joke and humour to give you that toolkit. And she does stuff around one-liners. And I've tried doing it, and my brain just wanders too much. So I start writing a one-liner, and then I write all this other stuff around it, and it becomes far more bloated. So my brain's just not kind of geared to just...
That's fascinating, because I think what you're trying to do is find your uniqueness as well, and I think through that, and I think you have done. When I've seen you live, it's an extraordinary act. I had a go at stand-up comedy once. I've told this to a lot of comedians, but it was so off the scale, it put me off. I know a promoter who it was in Edinburgh, and he said, I said, I want to get to have a go at stand-up comedy, and I think I can get it out of my system just to see what it's like. And he said, well, we've got a gong show for old women, for old people in Edinburgh on a Monday afternoon. It couldn't be worse. It was pouring down. There was 3 people in the crowd. And I wrote this script about me crashing cars in Carlisle because I'd just passed my driving test. And he liked it. So he said, go on and see how long you can do. So I walked out, and the first thing I said was, hello, ladies and gentlemen. People think I look like Eddie the Eagle Edwards, the ski jumper, but I can't see the resemblance myself. And I was expecting a reaction that you've just given. One old bloke in the back just went, fuck off, and gonged me off. And I walked off to my own footsteps, and the promoter said, have another go. And I said, and the same thing happened. And I said, I don't know about comedy, I said, but sitting in the audience is where I belong, supporting them all forevermore. And it's fascinating when you say, that's why I like to ask the question, because each comedian is different, because, as I say, they're trying to find their uniqueness.
Yeah. It's not just... And everyone's different, not just in, like you said, in their voices and their persona and the way they do it, but everyone's different in the way that they write and the way they create. There is no kind of standard way. I don't think it's different for everyone. There's probably some similarities between some people, because, I mean, there's only probably a limited numbers of way you can write. But it is fascinating that it just, everyone has their own thing. I mean, like I said, I did a lot of online courses, a lot of like masterclasses online with some established comedians, people like Mark Watson, Jess Foster Q,
brilliant,
Josie Long, and every one of them, said something very different, because they've all got very different styles. But what's useful is you try and pick out the things that, one, are kind of common, so you see the kind of themes that come up a lot, and 2, the things that just sort of speak to you, to say, oh yeah, I'd like to work like that. That makes sense for me. I think advice is something that you have to pick the stuff that you think fits well for what you're doing.
We had Mark Watson on here, interviewed on here, and you could tell his support for all the new comedians was paramount. He was extraordinary, and he's always on the lookout. You know, when he's on tour, he's always recommending comedians and stuff when you meet him. It is fascinating. Following on from that, have you entered yet into any comedy competitions?
Yes, yeah, I've done a couple. So I did one that was new this year, the West End New Act of the Year competition. Yeah. And I was lucky enough to get as far as the semi-final in that.
Well done, you. Well done, you. That's fantastic. Really good.
First competition and got as far as the semi-final, which is great because the guy who's running it, Steve McLean, he's then running a kind of showcase show up in Edinburgh this year for everyone that got through to the final, got their first pick of spots. And then once everyone who was in the final had chosen everything, he's then given people who got through to the semi-finals some spots as well. So I've actually got, at the moment, 4 spots up in Edinburgh at the festival this year.
So you're going?
It's lovely.
I will see you there.
You will indeed.
Oh man, that's wonderful. And what was your feeling of getting through to the semi-final in the comedy competition? Do you think they are a good thing? Do you think they help promote a comedian?
I think that's a tricky one for me to judge yet because I've only really done one.
Yeah.
So I can't really tell. I mean, what it is and what it seems to be really is it's just a way of saying to promoters, you can probably trust this person to have something that people will find funny.
Yeah.
Not necessarily everyone, because all acts are different, but they've at least proven themselves enough to get somewhere in a competition. So it's just something you put on your comedy CV, and it says to a promoter, this person can be funny.
That's a really good answer. That's really good considering you've only done the one, and many, many more, because you're so good on a stage. It's as I say, it's wonderful to see. When you walk out onto a stage, you always give me the impression that you're extremely confident and you're determined to make the audience laugh. Do you suffer from any nerves before you go on stage, and if so, how do you cope with them?
I think yes, I think there's always some small element of nerves. I think if you get too complacent, then you risk not being good. You probably need that edge of some nerves to give you the adrenaline to help push the performance. It does depend on the venue though. If I'm in a pub and it's an open mic gig where the audience is just 8-10 other comedians, then I'm not going to be so nervous about that. I think when I tend to get nervous is when I'm trying new material is the main one. If I haven't tried something yet, every new routine, I always think it's just not going to be as funny as the last thing until I do it and somebody laughs. But my head always says, just looking at it written down and just saying it, my head's always like, well, this isn't as funny as the last thing. And then when people start laughing, my brain goes, oh, well, okay, you can use this. So I get nervous then, and I get sometimes a little bit nervous if it's somewhere where I don't know the promoter or the venue. Right. So I don't know what sort of gig it's going to be. But yeah, I do get nervous. But I think you talked about kind of the way I come on. Yeah. That's almost like a deliberate trick for my own brain. So I don't come on and start talking straight away. I always come on and sort of pause a little bit and almost see if I can make the audience a little bit uncomfortable, because it's a little bit about putting the control in my hands. And then once you talked as well about like Harry Hill doing coming in with a joke. That was the advice I got from a lot of the workshops and that I did, was be as funny as you can, as quick as you can, make people laugh straight off as close as you can. That buys you the leeway to then maybe set something else up, because people have gone, oh, he's funny, and they relax. And then if you're taking a little bit of time to set up the next thing, they at least think, oh, well, he is going to go somewhere with this because he's he's already made me laugh. So I'll give him time.
What's wonderful about you is that when I watch you live, you have this confidence to walk on, which is very, it's not endearing, but it makes the audience want to listen to more of what you're saying. And because you've got that, you can then get away and say whatever you like, as long as you've got them on your side. And it's right, the comedian has to go, I believe, straight away with a joke or a funny line, and the audience can tell straight away whether or not they're going to enjoy it, I think, because I've seen so many over the years. And I think you've got it in droves. It's effortless with you.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. But I'm glad you say that, because that's the intention, is to try and get people on side and bought in, but without doing that. I mean, I think the thing I find is doing a lot of open mic gigs. Obviously, you have a lot of people on the bill.
Sure.
And if you've had 3 or 4 people in a row who've come on and said, oh, hi, how is everyone tonight? It's like by the third person that said that, it's like we're the same as we were 2 acts ago. And so I don't ever want to start with that kind of, hi, how is everyone? That kind of audience interaction. Yeah. I don't think that's me, really.
No.
I don't care.
Well, no, exactly. It's interesting because I went to Birdie's on the Strand, the free comedy night, which is run by Jimmy Bird, who's a professional comic, and the resident MC is Brendan O'Donoghue, who's like Frank Carson on acid. He's hilarious, this compere. And it was literally, there was about 20 comedians on, and what you're looking for in that environment is someone with originality and who's unique, who could stand out. So I saw the likes of Vic Slayton, Josh Balfe, Darren Walsh was there, and these people you could see just had whatever it was to continue and look at where they are now. So good luck to you, my friend. Keep going. I wish you every success. I think as soon as I saw you, I thought, this guy's funny, and there I was laughing at you, my friend.
But that's high praise from this audience.
My pleasure. Let's move on to Edinburgh. Have you been to the Edinburgh Fringe before? Have you been as a punter? You've never been?
No, I've never been.
Wow.
I was going to go for the first time in 2020.
Oh, man.
So I don't know if you know, there was a pandemic. So
apparently there was something horrible right around the world that stopped bloody everything.
So this year will actually be my first time. So I'm mainly going as a punter, because I haven't really been before.
Right.
But given I got offered some spots, I was like, well, yeah, I'll definitely do that while I'm there. But mostly I want to actually just go and see what the festival's like and take it in.
You will love it. You'll absolutely love it.
I guess enjoy it before it becomes something I work at.
My holidays, I've been very fortunate enough to be able to go to the Edinburgh Fringe since 2005. That was my first one. And the only 2 I've missed are the last 2 years. The train gets into Waverley, you step off the train and the atmosphere hits you. It's extraordinary. I'm one of these sad comedy nerds who do a spreadsheet of every single act I'm going to try and squeeze in to see. And by the end of the week, I've seen about 50 shows. And I need a holiday by the time I come back. I'm exhausted. But it's just the best. It's just the best thing. And to see, certainly this year, with it being, I mean, it did take place last year, but it was a very, very limited thing. Lots of new and established comics have got brand new shows. And it's their 75th birthday. So what a year to go. I'm 55. They're all laughter lines, but I'm 55 in August, and the Fringe is 75. So it couldn't be better. We've got Mervyn Stutter coming on my blog. Mervyn Stutter is the legendary compere of the lunchtime show. He's been doing it for 30 years. Right. And I go and see him every year I go, because it sets you up for the day. It's a wonderful thing. But you will have an absolute blast, my friend. And
Well, I'll definitely join you at one of the lunchtime shows.
Definitely, I'm going. I know this will have happened presumably by the time this recording goes out. But I'm going. I normally go the midweek. there's 3 weeks. I'll go the middle week. So I'm going Sunday the 14th to the 21st. So I will see you there.
Okay. Yeah.
Good
I'm there
man.
the 8th to the 19th. So definitely.
Oh well, definitely.
Yeah.
Do let me know when you're on, and I will come and see you. Come hell or high water. All right, mate. So the Edinburgh Fringe is going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Sofa So Funny. I was standing at the bar at Always Be Comedy, which is a regular comedy club I go to, and there was lovely Leslie Gold persuading me to come to a night at Sofa So Funny. I've seen you live there the 2 times I've been there. It's every month, every second Monday. Yeah, and it's at London Bridge. I've seen you twice there. One of the times was comparing, and one of the times was a routine. Please, can you describe your writing process, if you've got one, and where you get your ideas from for the routines?
I think there's probably a couple of different ways that routines come together. So sometimes it does come out of doing things like writing prompts and exercises. I've gotten a couple of routines out of just taking a subject and doing a writing exercise around it, and then that's kind of morphed into a routine I can use. But more often than not, it feels like this is the kind of thing where everyone's like, oh, it's a sort of, this is what you expect happens, but something will just come into my head as a collection of a couple of thoughts. I'll start writing it, and then either it will blossom into a full routine, or it will just stop short, and there just won't be enough there to make it into something usable. I think as well, the way I write is, like I said, I don't do sort of short jokes and bits that I can chop and change. They're always kind of, 2 to 4 minute segments that are themed around something, and I'll try and get as many funny lines or funny points in that 2 to 4 minutes about that thing as I can. Someone very kindly said to me recently, they were like, your stuff always seems very densely packed, in that you've got quite a lot of points where you put sort of jokes in. And I think that comes out of, like I said to you earlier, writing long and then sort of distilling it down to try and get rid of any words you don't need to get to the next funny bit.
I agree with that. I think in the time that you've got, you do cram in as much comedy as you can, which is obviously the whole point of the thing. And it works every time. It worked. It was so good. Did you find comparing different to hosting to a show routine?
Yeah, very different. So that the time you came to see me emceeing was my first time, and so far my only time. I haven't emceed again yet, but I would like to MC again. So hopefully I will get the chance. And again, that was very kindly Leslie offered me the chance, because she normally MCs so funny, but she was accepting a comedy award that night. So.
Well, there we are.
so I got the chance. But yeah, it is a very different thing, because when you're doing a 5, 10 or even 15-minute spot, you're really only worried about going up and doing your bit in the show, and then you're not really, other than enjoying the other acts, you're not really invested in the show itself for the rest of that. You're just, outside of doing your routine, you're effectively another punter just watching and enjoying the show for everyone else. Whereas obviously when you're emceeing, you are you're holding everything about the show in your head. So you're making sure you've got the running order right. You're making sure people keep to time and don't overrun, so that you can get everyone in and get the show done before a specific time. And also, I had a couple of little bits prepared, but unlike my usual stuff where I've talked about, it's very written, it's very scripted, I just had to have a couple of ideas of things I could maybe do with the audience to fill time in between it. I spoke to one of the other acts who was on that night beforehand, because he does a lot of emceeing, and he gave me some advice, as did Leslie, obviously. One of the things that I didn't appreciate is what an MC will do is you have to regulate the audience. So it's not just if somebody doesn't do as well as they've hoped, you've got to bring the audience back up again. If somebody actually absolutely smashes it, actually you've got to do the opposite. You've got to bring the audience back down so that the next act doesn't suffer from being on from someone who's had a huge response. So it's like those sort of things. I mean, fortunately, I didn't have to worry about that at the Sofa So Funny because the acts were all good. So it was a consistent level of audience response throughout. And the audience is very good as well, so that
it helps. Yeah,
always helps. There was a guy in the front row who was brilliant. I can't remember his.
Somebody,
name.
I can't remember his name either.
Robert something, Robert Groves.
I think yeah, something like that. Yeah, that is interesting because the compares that I've seen, certainly during lockdown, I would go to Always Be Comedy or Return of the Crack, the Jarlath Regan one, or Sean James's one, and you could see that they were trying to control the audience from the acts in between. And certainly if I go to Always Be Comedy live, just before he comes on, you can see James Gill psyching himself up, and then he's away. It's extraordinary, the techniques that they use.
Yeah, the one thing I hadn't appreciated was the amount of extra energy that being an MC consumes. Because and it makes sense. It's just basic maths. Normally you do 5, 10, 15 minutes. For this, you're on throughout the whole 2 hours, up and down in between the acts. So your adrenaline levels keep spiking every time you go back up. And the next day I was absolutely wrung out, and I just hadn't really expected that. I think as well I was more keyed up because it was my first time doing it.
Of course.
And it was someone else's regular show, so I was conscious of not absolutely spoiling it, So all those kind of things made me sort of more keyed up than I probably would have been. So it meant that I had an absolute massive crash the next day.
You're not alone, my friend. I am wrung out after every comedy gig I go to. I can't think why.
And I did kind of steal a little bit from James Gill slightly in my emceeing, in that he often gives out sweets to people, and I used some chocolate as a reward for a little audience.
You did.
A mild competition.
And that worked.
Yeah, thank you.
So you've only been going 18 months.
Yeah.
Do you have any ambitions as a comedian? Would you like to be on TV? Would you like to be on radio? Would you like to play the O2? Come on, big ambitions.
I think so. I'm by day I'm a project manager, so I think in stages. I think in phases. So my first phase is good, get better. Yeah. That's my first ambition: is keep doing it, keep gigging as much as you can, get better at it. I think my next ambition would be, I would like to get to the point that I do an hour show. Wow. I think I would like to have a 45 minute to an hour solo show.
So that'll be Edinburgh 1 year soon.
Maybe Edinburgh, or at the very least, maybe some of the other fringes. Maybe start out with ones like kind of Brighton, Camden, Leicester. If I can get, I know Leicester's obviously kind of a bigger deal than that, but I think the expense of Edinburgh is something you have to weigh up as well, because there's the travel costs, there's the accommodation, as well as actually the venue and the flyering and all that kind of stuff that I've heard tell is the kind of big drag there. So I think that's the immediate issue. Beyond that, I don't really know. I mean, my main ambition, like I said, is I just want to be good at doing it. I think because I've come to it later in life, I have a job, so I can afford to do this in my sort of evenings and weekends. But there will probably come a point where, I'll be gigging more, I'll get offered more, and I might have to start thinking about what that means for.
I was just going to ask you. I know it's only been 18 months, but has there been a point in that 18 months where you think, yes, I'm quite good at this. I can do this forevermore.
It's a weird thing. I'm a naturally introverted, not in the sense of like I don't talk to people, but I get the way I see an introvert is I'm somebody that needs energy and recharge time being on their own. You know, I need that kind of headspace of being on my own, and I'm also naturally sort of slightly self-deprecating, and very, very English in that respect. So the idea of like thinking of myself as like, yeah, I'm good at this and I can do it, is very difficult to do. But I have in recent months been coming to the point where I'm thinking, yeah, I can do this, and I can be funny. But
that's good.
That still comes with the worry of, can I keep being funny? Can I come up with new funny? And that's always the big worry. I've got some stuff I've done that is funny, but can I keep it up indefinitely? And can I do enough? Can I generate enough to maybe move it into being something more than just something I do in my evenings and weekends? I don't know.
What is particularly impressive when I watch you is the calmness around you. You've got a very calm delivery, but it's intelligent and very clever, and you're very dry as well, which makes it all the more funnier. I wanted to say that to you because I think that's a unique point about you. And straight away I thought, this guy's good. This guy's really funny in his delivery.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I think that's the sort of humour that appeals to. I mean, I like lots of different humour. Yeah. I like people who can do big and shouty and expressive and ranting. I like people who can do weird and surreal and off the wall. And I like people who are dry and deadpan sort of thing. Yeah. I think I'm more disposed towards, like you said, the drier, the deadpan thing. Yeah. It's interesting you say that. At work, I've often been referred to as like a calming influence.
Yeah.
And I think like I said, I'm a project manager by day. And part of that is you've got to be the person in the middle that everyone trusts and everyone can go to, and isn't the one that's having the dramas and having the issues, and you're the one that has to resolve everything. So I think that probably carries over into the comedy. It's like I'm just telling you all this stuff that's going on in my head, but I'm the calm centre of it in the middle.
Good lad, good man. Moving on from that, and there is a link with the different types of comedy. Who are your favourite comedians, past and present? When you were growing up, did you have comedy in the house? Have you always enjoyed comedy?
Yeah. Always been a big sort of comedy nerd from like a very young age, and that comes from like mum and dad showing us loads of comedy stuff. So I got a love of things like Spike Milligan and Monty Python from my parents. They would show us stuff like Young Ones, Blackadder, so all that kind of stuff we got into. So there was always kind of comedy in the house. I grew up watching, and classic stuff I'd watch with the grandparents as well. So particularly when we were around at my sort of dad's parents' place with my granddad, we'd often be watching Marx Brothers and Laurel and Hardy.
Oh, brilliant.
And then Morecambe and Wise, and sort of classic stuff like Hancock and Steptoe. Brilliant. So all those kind of things, I grew up with them sort of seeping in. And then as I started to get probably sort of, from the age of sort of 10, 11, 12, getting into teenage years, I started to get into, I think, stand-up that's probably more accessible for kids at the time. So people like Lenny Henry, and to an extent Ben Elton, and people like that, Jasper Carrott, all that sort of stuff around that time, I think was a lot more... it's almost slightly more family-oriented stand-up. So it's a way into the kind of edgier stuff. And then, as I got into teenage years, it's people like Eddie Izzard and so on and so forth, all those kind of things. But to an extent, my favourite comedians is often whoever I've seen recently, and I think there's tons of brilliant comedians out there
many
at the moment, and I discovered loads through lockdown, through watching loads of online comedy as well. So like people like who I'd seen before but never properly, but online were doing lots of stuff. So Josie Long, Jess Fosterque, Maisie Adam, Mark Watson, Tim Key, obviously Stuart Goldsmith was an influence. Colin Holt, who plays Anna Mann, was another one. I started doing Colin's online shows and taking part in them and doing sort of funny interactions with Anna that helped. So I think there's and I think the risk is whenever you start naming favourites, people will be like, "Oh, why didn't you name that one?" I'm like, "Oh, because I could sit here for about an hour and just list comedians' names that I like. John Luke Roberts and Alistair King and all. Yeah, I could just Stuart Lee, the influence, yeah."
And following on from that, like me, do you go to a lot of comedy gigs as a member of the audience?
Yeah, more so now. I think I always liked to, but there was a period in my life where I didn't go to a huge amount of comedy because the work and life meant that wasn't feasible to go out a lot and do that sort of thing. But I'm at a point now where I sort of can do that. So yeah, and again, particularly since I started watching a lot of online stuff during lockdown, since lockdown has eased and we've gone back out again, I've then been going and seeing those people live to actually sort of see them kind of properly. And like you said, Always Be Comedy is always a great venue for that. I recently saw Stuart Lee and Mike Wozniak doing shows. Saw Maisie Adam. Who else? Adam Hess, who I really enjoyed. Michael Adewale. All these kind of people that I probably wouldn't have heard of before, but have now discovered through lockdown. Definitely. Obviously, Always Be Comedy. Bill Murray's a good venue as well for those.
There's so many good ones. There's so many good venues. If you're on a bill, do you tend to stay and watch all the acts that are on the bill?
Yeah, pretty much all the time. Yeah. I mean, it sounds a bit noble when you say that. At the open mic level, most of the time you're expected to stay and watch, because sometimes the comedians are a fair chunk of the audience. So,
of course.
And I genuinely think it's just good to support other acts.
Of course,
it's good to see other acts. It's good to see how other people do comedy. And, I was going to say, it gives you ideas, and that obviously the big no-no is stealing other people's jokes. I don't mean that. I don't mean I write down what someone says and think, oh, I could say that. But it might spark something. Yeah. Someone doing a specific topic might make your brain go, oh, actually, I've got something different, but around that where I could go. So I think, and actually, the one thing I found that was, maybe a little bit surprising is, I'm not at a professional level, so I can't talk for that, but certainly at the open mic level, it's very supportive. It feels like a community, and actually, you enjoy seeing other people, and you enjoy catching up with them, and seeing someone that you like again is always fun. And it's an opportunity to catch up with people that you like. And you mentioned it earlier as well about seeing an act progress, and I've seen that with my peers on the open mic circuit. They'd probably say the same about me as well. We've seen each other do gigs 9 months ago, and we're seeing each other again now, and it might be some of the same material, but it's different. It is different, and it has moved and it has progressed. Even if maybe the material hasn't changed much, people's performances change and the way they do it. And that's fascinating to watch. I mean, like I said, I'm a comedy nerd first and foremost.
What a wonderful answer.
So I was always fascinated in the how, and I still am. I still am fascinated in the how other people are doing it, and just watching other people do it. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. So you do something like that. That's brilliant. I wouldn't think to do that.
That's fantastic. The reason why I've asked the last three questions is that there's a section in my blog called "The Ones That Got Away." And I've seen, as I said at the start, over 1,000 comedians. The first comedian I ever saw was Les Dawson in 1977. Oh, nice. And then the year later we saw Tommy Cooper, who was amazing. And then it went on into, I saw Rick Mail, I saw Bill Hicks, I saw French and Saunders, everybody in the alternative boom, and then right through to now, where there's just such an influx of them. But as I say, there's a section in my blog called "The Ones That Got Away," and top of the tree there were Morecambe and Wise. I would have loved to have seen them, but also Dave Allen I missed, Bob Monkhouse I missed. I would have loved to have seen those, because they're part and fabric of British comedy. They really are. But there's I've written 25 of them in the blog. There's very, very few I haven't seen. I've been very, very fortunate. I just love it like you, and I'm as big a nerd, if not bigger.
Yeah, well, I'm envious of some of those ones that you've seen. I'd love to have seen Les Dawson and Tommy Cooper.
He was incredible. He really was. You've mentioned about how you started off online. How did you find online gigs as opposed to live comedy gigs, and what do you think the future is for comedy?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I have a different perspective to comedians who just went out and started doing live comedy because I started online.
Yeah.
I have a fondness for it, and I definitely think there's still a place for it. The difficulty I think with online stuff is getting an audience there. You know, I was lucky in that some of the so funny ones Leslie had, we had 100 people on one of them. Wow. Which for an open mic Zoom gig is a huge audience. Yeah. So if you've got that level of audience, it's great to do a Zoom gig. You know, one, because you do get a response, a bit of a lag, but you kind of get used to that. And two, you don't have to travel, and when you're done, you can shut your laptop. That's the end of it. But I think the great thing about online gigs, and whether it's doing a specific online only Zoom based gig or streaming gigs from a live venue, is it's brilliant for accessibility, because there are people who either can't get to that part of the country because it's a long way away, or there are people who, for whatever reason, don't leave the house, whether that's a physical or a mental condition that prevents them from doing it. And I think the rise of online comedy in the pandemic meant that we were including people who weren't getting to be part of comedy audiences, and I think it should continue, and I think more venues should start to do that kind of hybrid model, which I think your favorite venue, Always Be Comedy, is very, very good at that. They do a mixture of live only, online only, and live with streaming, which I think is a great model. And from a business point of view, it makes sense. You know, you can sell more tickets to people that you wouldn't be able to sell tickets to. Totally. And obviously you've got setup costs and things like that. I understand it's not necessarily, it might take a little while to pay off, but it just, to me, it seems a little bit of a no-brainer as to, well, this is a way to get more people to watch and know who you are as a comedian, and a way for promoters to get more tickets sold for events. So it feels like the sensible way to move forward with it.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. When lockdown first happened, when they were all first trying out the online comedy, there was no audio. So I would go to these gigs. I would sit in. I would sit in there, and I would laugh, but I was laughing silently at them, and I thought I was going to be taken away because I was laughing at four walls. You know, it was really, really odd. But when they introduced the audio element to it, the comedians could do the timing of the jokes. They could chat to the audience. It was so much easier for them, and they became very, very popular. Obviously, because everybody was locked down.
I think it creates a more intimate experience between the audience and the performer, because you as an audience member get to talk to a performer in a way that you just wouldn't in a live venue.
Having said all that, for me, you can't beat live because you don't know. It's of its moment, and you just do not know what's going to happen. I love to go out on a Saturday night, have a few beers, and then laugh like a drain at a live event. But long live online comedy, because it for all the reasons that you've mentioned. Thank God they've been able to do it. Otherwise, I don't think I would have got through lockdown. It was a lifeline for me. It really was.
Absolutely. Same here, really.
Yeah, so much so. And well, for you, it's your career. So
well, it's become what I do now. So
good on you, my friend.
Really wasn't expecting that when I started watching online comedy on Next Up in 2020.
Yeah, exactly. I've so much enjoyed talking to you. You've been a fantastic guest. You're such an intelligent comedian. It's so good with your answers. Just before we go, have you got anything else you'd like to say? Where can people find you on social media? Have you got any gigs or any writing or anything like this?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, thank you for having me as well. absolutely love talking to you.
My pleasure.
Like, you know, fellow comedy nerds, it's always good to just chat comedy. In terms of socials, I'm that baldy fella on Twitter and Instagram.
You're not bald.
I mean, I've got a bit in,
Yeah.
but there was a comedian recently who told me I just wasn't bald enough, you know. I'm that baldy fella. I also do. I've started doing streaming on Twitch as well now.
Brilliant.
And mostly, it's either me chatting about nerdy things, whether that be comedy, books, sci-fi,
Excellent.
that sort of stuff. And I occasionally do things like playing choose your own adventure games with the chat, or board games where you can do sort of solo play and involve the chat a little bit.
Brilliant.
And that's quite good fun. I've started doing that recently, and I'm that baldy fella on twitch.tv, and it's fella with an A at the end.
That's brilliant. And just remind the people, the viewers and listeners, when So Funny's on.
Yes, so So Funny is every second Monday of the month at St Christopher's Inn pub in London Bridge, and as of May, Leslie's going to be trialling a second night at the Flying Horse near Liverpool Street on the third Wednesday of the month. So
brilliant.
So from May onwards, that's a trial in May. So hopefully that will keep running. It depends when this podcast goes out. Hopefully it will still be going by then.
But sure.
The second Monday of the month at London Bridge is the sort of definite regular night for So Funny.
Well, I for one will be at both of those, and I will see you live on stage again very soon. And I'm so looking forward to seeing you at Edinburgh. I'm delighted you've got a few spots there as well.
Yeah. I think Edinburgh's going to be good fun, and I will definitely have at least a beer or two with you at some point.
Definitely, my friend. I think. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Today, it's been wonderful. And all the best to you.
Cheers, Rich.
Thanks now.